Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you so much for joining me here. Hope you're having a fantastic day. We got extremely important stuff here today. Super important you stick around and stay till the end because we got BlackRock XRP ETF filing. That's pumping the price action for that, as well as crypto executive orders essentially from Donald Trump, including crypto and 401ks. That is super huge. The important thing to recognize is that XRP and ETH are performing very, very well. Extremely more important is Ethereum pushing past that resistance at 4,000. We're also going to recognize some larger term time frame, basically divergences that are super important to recognize, and also the 3-day here as well with some MACD divergences. But I think most important thing here is recognize, we can start with this here first, is the ETF net inflow is now positive. I mean, it was the day before yesterday, but once more, we see this extra flow here essentially letting us know that Bitcoin is still in good shape. Both for crypto, both Bitcoin and Ethereum, both looking super strong. So these are very good signs here ultimately. So let's go ahead and talk quickly about Fear and Greed Index and just recognize here first and foremost, this is kind of just hanging out in the 50 to 60 range. That's awesome. We really want to see that kind of hanging out, maintaining this range. While it is nicer if it tapers off and pulls back, it's also relevant to kind of show us that we do have some strength right now. As long as we don't get too overextended, the concept here is that we maintain this range here for Fear and Greed Index. The likelihood of the price action of Bitcoin going higher is greater based on the fact that the sentiment is that people want to still buy this coin, right? The people still want to buy Bitcoin, and in turn, that's going to affect altcoins positively. We do see altcoin season index hanging out in the mid 30s, which is actually interesting because a lot of coins pumped yesterday, but this is tapering off so far this morning with some profits being taken. If we look at here, kind of like a collective understanding, we can see some profits are being taken here in the last couple of hours. So that's kind of standard stuff, but just important things to recognize. Once more, this is a very good gauge here of letting us know that altcoins are in good shape. Speaking of altcoins, let's take a look at Bitcoin market dominance essentially and kind of help understand that we continue to push and retest this support here at about 60.5%. Now this is like a pretty strong support range for us overall. I think we do break down below that 60% range. We're more likely to see altcoins start to surge. That's when things get really interesting, especially with ETF inflow being really high. Those are all very complementing factors, okay? So super important there. And you also kind of take into consideration what 401ks as well for crypto, and obviously an ETF approval for this coin here as well for XRP. Those are all important things. Let's jump right into the weekly here, just kind of touching on the divergence. I'm not trying to scare you or concern you, but typically when you retest the RSI multiple times, basically 3 times in a row effectively over a certain duration, then there's usually going to be a reversal to follow, right? It can happen bullishly too, but at this point, we can see a very similar structure here. We got a kind of an ascending type of trend here, essentially establishing higher highs, and we've got lower highs with our RSI on the weekly. So not to say that the price is going to go straight down from here as we saw previously, but there's a potential reality there. Okay, so just be mindful, let's not get too crazy ahead of ourselves as far as being like mega bullish. I think the preposition of seeing Bitcoin to 2, 3, 400,000 this year is a little bit of a farce. I think that's way too crazy, and I'd be more than happy to eat my words if that happens, because we'd all be 2x on our current positions roughly. So either way you look at it, just know that exists and that is a thing. Taking a quick look here at the 3-day too, it's important to recognize that we do have some divergences here. And I just want to kind of quickly note this because people don't really understand specifically the difference between or how the MACD does work. In other words, we have a divergence essentially letting us know it's like a shift in momentum, right? So that just occurred here recently, roughly early last week. Same thing as well, we had this happen in June, the same thing occurred, but the price went up from there. So I don't want you to get attached to the fact that a MACD is diverging or converging. Obviously the time frame is relevant, but in this case here, every time we've seen a divergence, the price action inevitably goes up, right? Well, it hasn't gone up yet, but there's still a good probability it could. The main reason why is because the momentum isn't there, right? Now, if you look here and you kind of circle back to previous timeframes, we had a divergence here, price goes up, right? So that's kind of a false positive. However, if you see a divergence, which we saw an MACD-FU, that's what I call it when the MACD basically rejects off of the 50-day EMA. We can see here though that the volume picked up here, right? As that volume and that momentum continues, then the price action goes faster and more precipitous, okay? So we want to pay attention to that. Essentially at this point, no big deal, but we start to see this pick up here, then we're going to be in a situation where we may want to consider either a shorting or averaging into our positions on the way down. Let's take a quick look here now that we understand the baseline there. Let's go to the backend data and kind of recognize where we're at here for Bitcoin. just kind of go from there because it's important to understand, obviously, the back-end liquidation data. We also want to look at the top traders and see what they're doing too. And the great thing about high block capital is it does help and allow us to kind of see that. Now, we are in a bullish type of flag pattern here that essentially rejected off its 0.5 fib level. I'll show you on the regular charts what that looks like, but the key takeaway here is this is still a bullish structure. However, if we do reject here, we could very well establish a lower low, hit that 112K support range once more. But if we do take a look at average top traders using leverage, this is basically just really large positions. We have more longs than shorts right now. Okay, and that's a good sign. We can also see we're starting to run flat here on the bid to ask ratio. So that is also a very positive situation. Take a look here at the open interest. We can recognize 118 and 120,000 of those two areas of concentration. And you do need to understand when you have those two areas of resistance, there's going to be some exit liquidity that comes in there, right? So people are probably upside down in their positions when they took longs at 118, 120. So that open interest, we could very well see some exit liquidity when that occurs. So that's why it's considered to be a resistance, because people are upside down in their positions. A lot of times they just want to get out of it. That's not all of it, of course. That's just a small perception of how open interest works, but the easiest way to understand it, support and resistance, we're underneath those heavy amounts of resistance. Coincidentally, there's some liquidation at those ranges. We'll look at that here in a second, but open interest is good. Liquidation delta is now at about 8 billion, or tapering off from 8 billion as its current high. Now, keep in mind, when we had these really strong runs, 20, 30, 40 billion is kind of the average. So this isn't super monumental for Bitcoin. It's kind of standard. It just implies there's more bulls and bears in the market. You don't necessarily want to try to short against that. Looking here at liquidation, this is that chunk that we can see with open interest too, because keep in mind, liquidation events occur at areas of support and resistance. So a lot of times people will put their stop loss and or the liquidation event will occur there because of the fact that that's where invalidation occurs, which is usually what I like to trade on when I send out my trade alerts. Quick little congrats, of course, just got to touch on this because this does tie into the invalidations. We took along with Crow Coin 42% with ETH, Doge 55% and 51% from XRP. We also have a Bitcoin long in there somewhere too, which is right there at 31%. Averaged about 113K for that trade. I'm pointing this out because I have trade alerts that are specifically designed to tell you invalidation levels, so you know specifically how to close your trade if it goes bad on you. This would have applied had we had a short position open on this coin, right? So let's take a quick look here. And just recognize too, to kind of round out the backend data. For our data explorer here, I like to have true retail longs on here. And this does tell us when this percentage is lower than open interest, which is at 32%, that's usually a bearish type of convergence, okay? So it's not something you're gonna see on the charts, but when open interest is higher than the average amount of people taking trades, it's super important to recognize that that's gonna push the price action higher. It's a really strange thing and it's not really easy to understand. I've studied it for a while, so just trust me on this, that's a very good consideration. And we take a look here. The daily time frame from basically Bitcoin, here's that bull flag type of pattern that we're looking at. Now, to quickly note, we are retesting that resistance here. Okay, so it hasn't broken yet, but the key takeaway I think is if you look here and you zoom in on this divergence here, or more so correction, this pullback effectively from our fib levels from our high of 123 and some change down to 112, we can see that this 0.5 fib level, so basically the halfway point, is working as a resistance. So 117.5 is roughly our resistance here for the moment. We can also recognize too, 118,000 is that point of control. Once more, open interest, point of control, they're roughly the same concept depending on the time frame you use, as well as the simple fact that we have our moving average right here too at 116. So a lot of people will see that moving average and be like, oh great, we're above it, we're going to go long. Not necessarily a good call because we have a lot of resistance above the price. You typically want to, and most smarter traders, I'd like to classify them as, are going to be more patient to wait to see that level broken first before they take a long. Now you might kind of think into yourself, wait a minute, that's a breakout trade, which is statistically less favorable, which is true. But on the same accord, lately, until this trend is broken, we've had significant trends, both rectangular and descending. They always tend to work out favorably if you consider to buy the bottom and short the top. Right now, we're tentatively at the top. hypothetically a short would make sense, but I'm not proposing you do that right now because there's a lot of back-end data telling us otherwise, right? And that's why we look at it. Anyways, we're above all moving averages in the 4-hour time frame. We can see here that we are over 50 on the RSI here as well, which is super important. I don't care about the stochastic RSI. Money flow index is above the RSI. That's the most important thing here. We're also hanging out right at that moving average too. So the 4-hour looks very strong, and there's no real reason to consider betting against this, okay? So I don't recommend a short position with Bitcoin by any stretch. I think 118 to 120K range may be a little bit better of a consideration if you're going to do that. All right, let's go ahead and move on to ETH. See what's going on with this guy here. So Ethereum, backend data first for Ethereum. We want to look at this and kind of get a baseline and see what the liquidation was. If I'm not mistaken, majority of the liquidation has been swept. And I think there was some upwards, most upwards about 4,000, and that's all gone now. Okay, liquidation long delta is super high. We're at 15 billion. That's quite a lot. And in fact, you can see that reflected here with our ETF, right? We look at ETF inflow. Ethereum is almost rivaling Bitcoin with the amount of inflows here recently. Keep in mind there's a 2-day lag, of course, so it's never truly like right on target. But the key takeaway here is that we got a lot of open interest below the price. We took a long in the 36 to 3,700 range, basically 36.90 if I'm not mistaken, because we didn't average into our second position there. But you can see all this open interest that led me to feel more confident taking a trade. You have open interest below the price, the likelihood of sustainability is higher. This is one of the few coins that has the most amount of open interest in the current range that it just broke. Okay, so that's awesome. Let's take a look here and just recognize there's massive overextensions, right? We are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 4-hour candles, 24 hours of overextension here in this direction. So the likelihood of a pullback makes sense, but is the odds of taking a short position that favorable? It's not. It really just depends on how Bitcoin performs. If Bitcoin dumps, sure, we'll see Ethereum pull back. But between now and then, this coin is front-running altcoin season, and that's generally how it works. So that's usually the first outlier you want to look for when altcoin season occurs, is just see that divergence there essentially for Ethereum being the only coin that's really rocking and rolling. And so far today, it seems to be the case. Obviously, altcoins are doing well in general, but this one's performing a lot better if you stack it side by side. We're up about 14%, since roughly this time yesterday, or perhaps even, maybe 36 hours ago. Either way you look at it, it's a lot of movement in a short amount of time. So that's fantastic. All that being said, the daily time frame still looks fantastic, phenomenal. There's no other way around it. I mentioned that yesterday, and I've been talking about that pretty much all week, that you don't want to short against this coin. So congrats to those who got in at 3,600. That's really awesome. So taking a look here, we can see 4-hour, we've broken above 70 in the RSI. This is just a consideration to omit shorting this coin. I don't care if it comes down to 3,200 tomorrow. It's just based on what you see here, there's no reason to consider shorting this coin because it's too strong. But once more, massive overextensions combined with a lot of liquidation that may occur to the downside on shorter time frames, which I didn't look at the 24-hour period yet, but I think this coin is looking pretty sustainable. And minus the fact that we do have a fair value gap really close to our local point of control, or sorry, that 0.618 fib level, we're in really good shape to see the price probably go higher. So I don't think you should short against this coin. We close above 4,000 a day. Solid chance we continue further up. Moving on to Solana, let's take a look here at the back end first and recognize that open interest is still heavy at 168. So that's the support level for Solana. So the good news is we retested that level a couple times before the price took off. So congrats to those who took some longs yesterday on Solana. I wasn't willing to do so because it's in such a weird little range right now. In fact, we're testing our resistance that I feel like a short may be viable on this coin if Bitcoin starts to stall out. All that said, though, we have liquidation long delta telling us the price is going to go higher, but there's very little liquidation left above the price. This is the last 7 days. Let's quickly note if there's any macro liquidation, just to see on the 1 month, and recognize that there definitely is. There's a good chunk here at about 185 and 187. So I'll post this playout chart on our Twitter, Telegram, Discord to get you that as more updated details, but those are areas of consideration for take profit. We can see some confluence there at that 0.236 Feb level as well at 187. So we might see some rejection in that range. But once more, previously 185 has been a pretty solid amount of resistance here for us, both the local and larger timeframes. So we're traveling into our resistance range. We're right there at our point of control here over the last month's worth of trading at 176. So hypothetically, the price pulls back from 176 to 168. consider a long at 168. That's the concept. But between now and then, shorting to that level is considered to be higher risk. So just know that. Taking here a look at SUI, what's going on with this guy? Well, SUI's an interesting one because it's got a tremendous amount of resistance above us. Look at this here, $4.30 to $4 even is that super strong area of open interest. In other words, tons of people are underwater at that level. So a lot of times, when you get to that range, people are going to want to close out and get out of their position. We take a look here though, we can see liquidation long delta is not super, super high right now. We can see it's what, 300 million. That's pretty low for this coin, but it does nonetheless still have more longs than shorts comparatively, right? In the 1 month, we can see super significantly large amounts of liquidation above and below the price. They're pretty far away, but if we zoom in, if I'm not mistaken, we should have some above the price action. We got it above and below, but we look here more specifically, once again, $4 to $4.30. Okay, so that's kind of the next area. If we do break $4, which I think is less likely on the first attempt, we're probably going to see a push to $4.30. That's kind of what we're looking at there for SUI. But once more, we're seeing a bit of an overextension / consolidation at its point of control at 378. So if we zoom in a little bit here, we can see we're at a 0.5 fib level, similar to Bitcoin, pretty much exactly that same rejection level, but it's starting to work itself into a nice type of triangle, or you could even argue this is a bullish type of pennant pattern. My drawing is very ugly, but the key takeaway here is that this is somewhat of a bullish structure, especially with all the moving averages below the price action. Let's see if we have any convergence here on the daily time frame, which we want to recognize. We do have that overextension pivot. We are now back up over 50 in the RSI above our moving average. The only thing that's lacking is money flow index. So we have more MFI flowing in here soon, and we're going to be in good shape to see continuation higher. So really looking pretty solid here in the overall sense. We also got a MACD converging overall here on the daily. And once more, you combine that with the 4-hour time frame, we can recognize there's pretty good amount of support. So if you get lucky on a trade with this coin, 363 would be the optimal consideration for a long. I don't think it's worthwhile or a good consideration to short into that, even though it's probably more likely we're going to see 363 again. It just seems like inherently a more riskier play. So me personally, in a situation like this, I like to sit on the sidelines, wait for that kind of desirable level to be entered or to be triggered on my alerts, reevaluate, and then jump in, considering if Bitcoin is still in good shape. So between now and then, patience is key. But if you're going to take statistically, I think the odds of further upside to retest $4 is higher for SUI. Looking here at XRP, we want to double check this too, back-end data. Heavy concentration at $3 and $2.93. That's roughly where we averaged into our position for our long. Granted, I don't think we got filled at our, it was like 280, 289, and then price came down to 290 for our second entry. But what I'm getting at here is we saw a pretty significant continuation. A lot of it is based on this approval pending and Bitcoin doing well. If you've been watching my channel for any stretch of time, you'll know that XRP, outside of fundamental catalyst, performs very consistent with Bitcoin. So it's kind of like, what's Bitcoin doing? Okay, I'm going to do that too. It's essentially doing that for the most part. So with Bitcoin looking strong right now, it makes a lot more sense to consider longs versus shorts of this coin. However, all that aside, this is also a very emotional coin. And what I mean by that is people that trade it are emotional, and they're going to just FOMO in and just say, shut up and take my money. So at this point, we're going to probably see a lot more continuation based on that sentiment, not necessarily based on the TA. But from a technical standpoint, we can see liquidation long delta is right at about 500 million, down from 2 billion. And then we can recognize as well, both longs and shorts are getting swept in both directions. So generally unfavorable to consider, I would say, a trade at this point. But we do take a look at the charts though. I want to recognize that we have this nice 0.5 fib level with some fair value gap left. We also have our previous extension here with our extension line. A lot of times you'll see that retest as a new low. So I would say 320 to 310, which was a previous resistance for us, is now the new support. So we're just going to go ahead and put that on the charts and essentially pay attention to that here for later. So once more, a lot of times when you're trading, you just want to kind of be patient, not just FOMO in. I don't think it's a good time to FOMO in personally, but once more, we could be in the beginning of a nice push to the upside. But this is a tricky situation, folks. Today's Friday, tomorrow's a weekend, or today's a weekend, depending on how you think about it. And the overall sense here is that things are mostly bullish. You should expect things to go higher, but a correction to the downside makes sense. It's inherently more risky to try to short against this kind of trend. That's the key takeaway. You're going to short and you insist on it, take profit targets close to, make sure you adjust your stop loss and your take profit targets on your way down. All right, folks, hope that makes sense. I described it correctly. Last but not least, be sure to check out BitUnix too, folks. Phenomenal exchange, no KYC or VPN required. They have a 20% deposit reward bonus right now, as well as a first-time trading reward too. So use the link below for that. And obviously join us on Twitter, Telegram, and Discord if you want to be in the know with some good stuff here. Either way, hope you all have a good rest of the day. We'll look forward to seeing the next one. Take care of yourself out there. Bye-bye.